Çok teşekkürler Ekim. Sayın Büyükelçi, Sayın Müsteşar, ladies and gentlemen, iyi akşamlar, hoş geldiniz. I'm really pleased to be back with you this year for the 35th annual conference, which I think importantly this year brings together two of the most important business associations working in Turkey and in the United States. And before I get to my prepared remarks, I'd like to ask all of you, please, to take a minute away from your conversations and take a minute from listening to me, and please join me in a moment of silence, for all of the security force personnel and the civilians in Turkey who have lost their lives to violence and terrorism in the year since we last were together here in Washington. And may I just say to all of our Turkish colleagues here tonight, başınız sağ olsun. It is with great pain and sorrow that those of us who feel such affection for your country are witnessing the trauma that your society, individual cities, individual families have been subjected to in the last year in particular. And so it is with that deep respect for the suffering and the pain in Turkish society that we are working so hard to help you weather this storm and to come through it as a stronger, more resilient, and more dynamic society in the future. I also, before I get to the meat of what I'm here to say tonight, I want to also acknowledge an enormous hole in our hearts and in the relationship between our countries and our business communities with the untimely passing of Mustafa Koç, who left us all way too soon, but who, with Caroline, with your presence here tonight, with the sponsorship clearly behind us on the screen, there are so many ways in which the dynamism and the big heart and big personality of Mustafa continue to enrich our lives and to carry this relationship forward. And so I know that on many days, although we all miss him very much, I'm confident that he is still with us and giving us that little nudge from time to time that we need to put our heads down and get back to work. And so thank you again for being with us tonight. Ekim, thank you very much for that generous introduction. A colleague told me before I went out for my first ambassadorial assignment that I was in for one of the best gigs that a person could have, because you're never, this person said to me, you're never as smart, as funny, or as good looking, Howard, as you are when you're an ambassador. And for the bulk of my tenure in 2 different countries as ambassador, that's been true. Until, of course, I have to share the stage with Tony Blinken, who is smarter than I am. He's funnier than I am, and he's definitely better looking than I am. So I'm going to let my boss, by the way, speak for me and much of what you would have heard from me had he not been able to join us here tonight. And instead, I want to just take a couple of, a couple of minutes to reiterate, reemphasize a couple of the points that Tony made, but more importantly, talk about one of the reasons why, notwithstanding all of the work that you are doing independently and together through this conference and around this conference, why all of you are such a key piece of the health and success of the relationship in the past, and an essential element going forward. This conference, to my mind, has never been more important or more essential than it is today in its 35th iteration. And that's true for a couple of reasons. The first one is because, from where I sit, from what I see every day, Turkey and the United States today need each other more than ever. Now, there's certainly a lot of commentary, as Ambassador Kilic noted, in American society, and there's certainly a lot of commentary in Turkish society and in the respective media environments, which suggests that's not the case. They suggest that there's some way to maybe decouple this relationship and we'd each be better off going our own ways or pursuing an independent course. I don't believe that's true. The three regions that Turkey is part of and that the United States has a profound interest in and long-term investments in have not experienced this much trauma and turmoil in many years. And if we are going to succeed in addressing these challenges, the challenges that Deputy Secretary Blinken articulated and detailed so eloquently, if we're going to be successful in addressing these challenges, we have to do it together. We will not succeed if we are trying to do this independently or if we are seen to be, or actually are, working at cross purposes. Unfortunately, I think everyone in this room would recognize, has maybe experienced to some degree, it's harder for us to work together right now than it has been in some time. Because I think each country, both countries and both governments, have more frustrations and are working their way through more misunderstandings with each other than is customary. Here in the United States, as, again, Serdar Bey noted, as Deputy Secretary Blinken noted, many Americans failed to understand the depth of the trauma inflicted on Turkish society this past summer on 15 July. And I think people in this country fail to understand the corrosive impact, the corrosive effect of the PKK's long-running effort to fracture Turkish society. And I think people here underestimate the strain placed on Turkish society and the Turkish economy from the unprecedented generosity of Turkey in caring for almost 3 million refugees, which is the equivalent for the Americans in the room of this country having absorbed somewhere around 11 million refugees in about 3.5 years. And if you think about the debates that we're witnessing in our country about immigration and refugees, and you think about that kind of number, that is an enormous sign of generosity and leadership that has enabled the United States to devote the vast majority of our support for Syrian refugees to help the other two frontline states with comparatively smaller economies and smaller populations to weather this challenge without being destabilized by it in the same way. So this remarkable generosity on the part of the Turkish people and the Turkish government is also a real sign of leadership. Now, in Turkey, at the same time as we have these misperceptions or deficits of understanding in the United States, I see a very strong narrative trend that many people seem to think that the United States wants to divide Turkey or undermine Turkey or somehow prevent Turkey from being successful. I'm here to tell you again tonight, as I have on many other occasions, nothing could be further from the truth. The reality is that the United States and the United States government very much want and need Turkey to succeed. We benefit when Turkey is strong, when it's prosperous, and when it's peaceful. And that is a core set of principles, if you will, and a marker that we try to follow as we work with the Turkish government and people across the Turkish society on these challenges that we face in this day and age. We want Turkey to succeed. We need Turkey to succeed. That brings me to the second reason why this conference, and particularly this conference this year, is so important. And that is that in a year of turmoil, in a year when the two governments have more friction, more tension, more of those differences of views that we have to work through, there's one group that's had comparatively much less difficulty listening to each other, understanding each other, and working to achieve mutually beneficial results. And that is the community that all of you are part of, the business community. Your work together to promote economic growth, development, and commercial cooperation is not only counterbalancing some of the current challenges on the political and security side of the relationship, it's importantly reminding wider audiences in Turkey and the United States that we are always stronger when we can work together. U.S. businesses represented here tonight, some represented here tonight, play a fundamental role in growing the Turkish economy. There are now over 1,400 U.S. firms operating in Turkey. They've created over 60,000 jobs in Turkey. They annually pay over 7 billion Turkish lira in taxes. And importantly, they are contributing to creating that transformational economy in Turkey based around innovation, blended with Turkish entrepreneurship, that is going to be a cornerstone for Turkey's success in the future. There's a lot of achievement in the business relationship, but there is also a great deal of potential still to be tapped. The U.S. government believes very much in tapping that potential, in realizing its full possibilities. And we're helping to turn that into reality. Whether it's the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, EXIM, the Trade Development Agency, they're all continuing an intense focus on the Turkish market. Now, 2 weeks ago, just as an example of this, when the daily headlines were mostly focused on conflict, our business communities made some other news. I was privileged to represent the United States government at a ceremony announcing the financing of 2 new mega hospitals in Izmir and Kocaeli. Turkish and American companies partnering together, receiving $500 million in financing from OPIC, with some support from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and also the Canadian Development Bank. That's an opportunity that is creating good business. It's creating some exports from the United States. But most importantly, it's a business opportunity that is going to improve and expand access to healthcare and the best, most modern forms of healthcare for a lot of Turkish citizens. And in doing so, help the Turkish government achieve a really central, critical goal, which is to improve access to healthcare and the quality of care for all Turkish citizens. In Izmir alone, this new facility, once it's built, will have the capacity to treat 12,000 patients a day. And so investments like this, I think, show that the U.S. government and the U.S. private sector's dedication to the people of Turkey is in itself a bet in Turkey's future and a belief in and a recognition of the resilience of the Turkish people, the resilience of the Turkish economy, and a belief in the dynamism of this important partner and this important society. There's another kind of investment that many of you contribute to, that many of you are the products of, and that is the investment we make in education and the investment we are currently making in the next generation of Turks and Americans coming of age in a very different world. And despite the security challenges which we are unfortunately seeing and experiencing and facing together, we're continuing to see Turkish and American scholars and students learning from each other, working together, thinking about, imagining, and bringing into reality those new futures in which we are going to benefit from dynamic, creative ideas, where we're going to see things like the Dream Chaser turned into reality, where our two societies are going to find ways to work together to create those stronger, peaceful, more prosperous futures for our respective citizens. And so every day, despite our differences occasionally, despite the challenges we face in three regions, of which Turkey is part, I see the deep and enduring relationship that our two countries have shared for decades. And I can assure you that we will continue to work for better cooperation, deeper communication, more investment, and a healthy exchange of ideas and opinions between the two societies. Frankly, we're not going to be successful if it's just the United States government or the United States Embassy that's doing this. We need all of you to continue to do the same thing, to help others see behind and beyond and around the headlines of the moment and the rhetoric of the moment, and to continue to propel the relationship forward. And in doing so, I think we all benefit from the great work of ATC and TAIC and all of the member companies of both organizations. So I want to thank all of you for the investments you've made in these associations. I want to thank you for investing in participating in the conference, and I want to thank you for all the great cooperation and collaboration and work together on this important set of challenges that you've done to date, and I look forward to continuing that work in the weeks and months and years to come. Çok teşekkürler.